Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening a stack of sources that, well, they tell one of the most compelling and dramatic stories in modern European history.
Absolutely. It's this astonishing contrast between two royal brothers.
Yeah, a story that history has kind of neatly packaged, maybe a bit too neatly, as the hero versus the traitor.
It really is a profound study in contrasts right from their earliest day. We're looking at Edward VIII, the really charismatic eldest son who chose love over duty, ended up reigning for less than a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then his brother, Albert, who became George VI, the reluctant king totally thrust onto the throne, but then became this, immovable symbol of British resilience during World War II.
So what we're really trying to do today is unpack the sheer shockwave of 1936, the abdication.
Right.
And crucially, get a handle on the lasting consequences of their, fundamentally opposed personalities. Was Edward's removal just about old-fashioned views on divorce?
Or was there more to it?
Exactly. Was he this politically volatile figure that the establishment, frankly, just wanted gone? And how much of George VI's success was maybe just relief that his brother was gone?
Right.
We've got the sources here to walk us through these pretty complex questions.
Indeed. And the core conflict, it's right there in their personalities from the get-go. You have Edward David, as the family called him, the glamorous heir apparent.
Yeah.
And then Albert, or Bertie, the second son, quite shy, physically challenged by that awful stutter, and certainly never, ever expected to weigh the crown. The stage was set for a clash long before either of them really understood the full weight of it all.
Okay, let's start with those formative years, because our sources, they really paint a picture of highly influential childhood, even if they were quite difficult. For Edward, born 1894, the pressure of being the future king was there immediately. But emotionally, it sounds incredibly cold.
That's right. The sources describe the parenting style of George V and Queen Mary as aloof and gruff. Now, that wasn't entirely unique for the time or the class, perhaps.
No.
But that emotional distance, it seems to have had a really profound effect on Edward. He later claimed he felt unloved. And this emotional gap, according to the research, it seems directly linked to his later choice.
Like what specifically?
Specifically, his profound reluctance to ever have children himself. He apparently saw it as just perpetuating this cold cycle that he'd endured.
And that seems to feed into another issue that really plagued him later on, a kind of lack of intellectual grounding. You have this charm, right? This easy, almost magnetic charm.
Oh, absolutely. He could mix comfortably with different social...
But his education was, shallow. The description used is that he grew up with an intellectually limited world.
And that phrase is just crucial, isn't it? I mean, imagine leading a major power in the 90s.
Right.
A time defined by these incredibly complex ideological global threat, fascism, communism, the Depression. You need a nuanced understanding, intellectual depth.
Which he lacked.
Which he seemed to lack. He tended to see complex issues in very simple, almost binary terms. And that would make him dangerously susceptible, really poor political judgment.
Now, contrast that with Albert, born just a year later in 1895. His challenges were physical, psychological, right from the start. He suffered from that severe, debilitating stutter.
Which is just a nightmare affliction for anyone, let alone someone in the public eye. Expect constant.
But there's another layer to Albert's early struggles, isn't there? The sources mention he was naturally left-handed.
Yeah, and in this, common but frankly bizarre educational practice back then, he was forced to write right. We know now that often causes psychological stress, confusion. It reinforces the sense of being inherently wrong or failing.
So you couple that physical coercion with the stammer.
And you get a young prince whose confidence was just fundamentally low.
Uh-huh.
He likely felt constantly inadequate, especially compared to his charming older brother.
Both of them followed the standard path, though. The military route for Princes Osborne, Dartmouth Naval Colleges.
Yes, standard procedure.
But again, the differences just leap out.
Yeah.
Edward, despite, the pressure of his destiny, he seemed to find a certain camaraderie there, even though he faced some bullying.
Whereas Albert, he genuinely struggled. He was often seasick, didn't do well academically, came bottom of his class at Osborne, apparently. Their military service, though, gets interrupted by World War I in 1940. Both served as officers, which was vital, a demonstration of royal solidarity.
But we have to look closely at Edward's service, right? He was commissioned into the Grenadier Guard.
But the reality, according to the sources, was that he was perpetually chaperoned, strategically kept away from the real front line.
Why? To avoid capture.
Exactly, to prevent him being captured or killed, which would have been an absolute disaster for the monarchy.
So his service was largely symbolic, effective for morale just by him being there.
Oh, his presence genuinely boosted morale on the Western Front, yes.
But that experience of being protected, treated as sort of untouchable, maybe that reinforced his sense of independence, his special status, made him less receptive to political constraints later.
That's a very plausible connection. And then amidst all this, in 1917, you have this almost mundane yet hugely significant change, the family name.
Yes, Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Didn't sound great during a war with Germany.
Not when German Gotha bombers were literally attacking London, no. So the necessary move to the very English, historically resonant name Windsor, a crucial act of national identity.
And that name Windsor would define both their legacies, would the Duke of Windsor and King George VI.
Precisely.
After the war in the 1920s, their paths just completely diverged. Edward goes to Oxford, but he's an indifferent student, much more interested in the social.
Yeah, he dove headfirst into the high life, became a fixture in London's nightclubs, dance halls.
And started that serious long-term affair with Frida Dudley Ward, a married woman with children. Lasted over a decade, didn't it?
It did, until 1934. Now, this lifestyle, it was definitely noticed, scrutinized, but what really worried the political establishment, according to the sources, was his demeanor towards the public.
How so?
These quasi-egalitarian manners, this attempt to be overly friendly, mixing with the rank and file, senior political circles saw it as highly inappropriate.
They weren't just worried about the nightclubs, then.
Less about the nightclubs, more about the prospect that a king who is too keen to mingle might feel empowered to exercise, quote, too much political independence, straying outside the established ceremonial constraints of a modern constitutional monarchy.
Okay. So the seeds of political mistrust were sown long before Wallace Simpson even showed up.
Absolutely. And while Edward was chasing the jazz age, Albert was quietly building this reputation for duty, for diligence.
Right. He studied history at Cambridge Trinity College alongside war veterans. Must have been ground.
Very much so. He became known as the working royal, dedicated himself to industrial welfare, visited factories, founded the Industrial Welfare Society. His own family nicknamed him the Foreman.
That's fascinating. The shy, nervous second son was the one actually cementing ties with the British working class.
Setting him up perfectly, in hindsight, as the steady contrast to his, shall we say, wayward brother. Right, so the abdication crisis, you really can't understand it without understanding the woman who triggered it all. Wallace Simpson?
The American socialite.
Born Bessie Wallace Warfield, 2 years younger than Edward. Her history was already, complicated. Married an American Air Force pilot in 19, divorced him in 27. Then she was married to Ernest Simpson, a businessman. She got involved.
And the sources are pretty blunt about the dynamic between them, aren't they?
Yeah.
Once Edward ended that long affair with Dudley Ward in 1934 and just became captivated by...
They really are. Edward is described as having a childlike personality, and she's described as the more dominant individual. He seemed completely, the phrase uses, under her thumb, perhaps seeking that maternal affection, that control he maybe never got as a child.
Could be. And by 1935, despite her still being married, he was totally smitten. Absolutely determined she would be his queen consort.
Which naturally raised immediate huge alarm. King George V and Queen Mary were vehemently against it. They saw her as this unsuitable American adventuress.
And it wasn't just the parents. By 1935, special branch police were already monitoring them.
Yes, which shows just how seriously the government was already taking the potential scandal. And then those quiet worries just exploded into a full-blown crisis when George V died, January 20. Edward VIII is proclaimed king.
And this is where Edward's limited intellectual worldview, as you called it, really failed him. He starts his reign with public goodwill, sure.
Yeah, initially.
But he quickly showed very little interest in the actual job, neglecting those famous red boxes of official documents.
And think about the timing. We're in 1936. Global instability peaking. Hitler, Mussolini, Japan's expansion, the Depression still biting.
Exactly the time you need a dedicated, sober monarch.
And instead, they got a distract whose main focus was clearly elsewhere.
And his neglect of duty just coincided with this constitutional storm brewing over Simpson. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin faced two massive problems.
Insurmountable problems, really. First, Simpson was a twice divorcee. Her second divorce was finalized in October 96, but legally she couldn't remarry for 6 months.
And for the Church of England.
Of which the king is supreme governor. Marrying a divorcee, especially one whose former husband was alive, on religious grounds, moral grounds, just no.
Okay, so that's issue one. What was the second?
Second was purely political. This profound concern about her American background and the alleged excessive influence she had.
Fears about loyalty, foreign influence.
Genuine fears, yeah. Could her loyalties be questionable? Could foreign powers use her to influence the king? Baldwin, who actually quite liked Edward personally, he delayed intervening, hoped the king would...
But that moment came, didn't it? When the British press, which had stayed silent out of respect,
was about to break that silence. Baldwin formally advised Edward, Simpson needs to halt her divorce, leave Britain.
And Edward's response?
Rejected it completely. Flat out. Claimed his marital status was a private matter. And that right there was the defining.
Okay, let's pause here because this is where it gets constitutionally tricky for you, the listener. Edward digs in, says he'll abdicate if he can't marry her. But there was this compromise floated. A morganatic marriage. What exactly was that and why didn't it work?
Right, a morganatic marriage. It's basically a legally recognized royal marriage, but the spouse is of lower social rank. Crucially, they hold no claim to the title of queen or king consort, and their children can't inherit.
So marriage without the crown status sounds like a potential fix.
It sounds like it, but it was rejected by Baldwin and, importantly, the Dominion. For one critical reason, you couldn't just declare a morganatic marriage. It needed a special act of parliament.
Not just in Britain.
No, in Britain and in all the dominions.
Yeah.
Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa.
And why was getting Parliament involved so dangerous?
Because it would have dragged the monarchy right into the political muck. Parliament would have had to publicly debate and vote on the king's marriage.
Unprecedented.
Totally unprecedented. Politically divisive. It would have torn apart the consensus around the crown. The monarchy absolutely needed to stay above that kind of day-to-day political fray. This would have destroyed that neutrality.
Which brings us to the role of the Dominion. Often understated, but crucial here. Why was their opinion so vital?
It's fundamental to the modern monarchy. The king wasn't just king of the UK. He was, and the monarch still is, the shared head of state for multiple independent. Under the Statute of Westminster from 31, any change session or the king's marital status needed the unanimous consent of all.
Unanimous, wow.
Unanimous. Baldwin canvassed their opinion, and the hostility to the marriage were well universal. That really sealed Edward. He couldn't marry her without shattering the unity of the British Empire and Commonwealth.
So, faced with that impossible choice, Wallace Simpson or the throne?
Chose Simpson, signed the instrument of abdication, reigned just 320.
His famous radio address, renouncing the crown to marry the woman I loved.
Yeah.
It sounded dignified at the time, perhaps.
It did have a certain poignancy, but it really masked the huge political turmoil and, frankly, his own profound failure to grasp his role. So Albert steps. His succession was sudden, immediate, utterly heartbreaking for him personally. He took the name honor.
But he really didn't want it.
Absolutely not. The sources confirm he was undeniably a reluctant. He reportedly broke down, wept when he told his mother the news. Here was a man never groomed for leadership, suddenly facing this divided nation, teetering on the brink of...
Yet, stability arrived almost immediately through his marriage, didn't it, to Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon?
Yes, and it's important to remember, he pursued her for 2 years before she accepted. Why? Because she knew the suffocating pressure of royal life.
But once they were married...
It was a genuinely happy partnership. The sources actually call it the first modern royal marriage.
And that was critical, wasn't it? Because unlike the cold, aloof parenting George V and Queen Mary practiced,
George VI and Elizabeth were warm, modern parents. They created exactly the kind of stable family unit the public craved. It was such a sharp contrast to Edward's chaotic ship. That foundation of domestic harmony was essential preparation for the national trauma to come.
And we have to talk about the stutter. Popular culture, the film especially, maybe gives a slightly skewed timeline.
It definitely compresses the reality. He didn't just suddenly find his voice on the war. His personal triumph over the stutter was a long, really arduous process that started years before the...
When did he start working on it?
Back in 1926. He began working with the Australian speech therapist Lionel Logue.
Logue.
Logue's methods were holistic. Not just mechanical exercises, but conscious techniques, relaxing throat muscles, managing anxiety. It wasn't a quick fix. It required daily practice, immense dedication from...
And we have proof it worked before the war.
Oh, yes. Tangible proof. When he opened Parliament House in Canberra, Australia in 1927, his speech showed marked improvement. That achievement, overcoming that lifelong affliction, it really speaks volumes about the dedication and perseverance he'd later bring throne.
So when Britain declares war on Germany, September 1939, George VI steps up. He was initially constitutionally bound to support the government of the day, right? Even Chamberlain's appeasement policy.
Yes, he supported the Munich Agreement in 1938. But when Churchill became prime minister, George VI quickly formed one of the closest relationships we've seen between a modern monarch and a political leader.
Those Tuesday lunches.
Exactly. Informal, weekly lunches every Tuesday. Sounds simple, but it was unprecedented. It gave Churchill this consistent sounding board, kept the king intimately informed about the war's darkest reality. It really strengthened their shared sense of purpose, built on mutual respect and sheer determination.
And that relationship was bolstered by some smart diplomacy beforehand, wasn't it? That U.S. state visit in June 1939.
A crucial event, the first time a reigning British monarch had ever visited the U.S.
Incredible.
And it was a brilliant diplomatic move conceived by President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself.
What was the goal? not just sight.
Definitely not. It was shrewdly designed to generate American sympathy, understanding, and, well, eventually material support for Brit war.
Those famous photos.
The king and queen relaxing, eating hot dogs with FDR at Hyde Park, all designed to forge a personal bond, and by extension, the nation. It laid absolutely essential psychological groundwork for later American aid, like the Lend-Lease program.
Then war is declared. George VI delivers that powerful radio address, notably free of his stammer. Once more, a supreme test has to be faced. Really unifying.
It was. But arguably, his most iconic contribution was his symbolic leadership during the Blitz. That sustained German bombing campaign against London and other cities, 1940 to 41.
They stayed in London.
They made the astonishingly courageous decision to remain in London throughout the worst of it, even after Buckingham Palace itself was bombed multiple times. This wasn't some gesture from a safe distance. It was a hazardous, real-life.
Tens of thousands of civilians were being killed.
Exactly. And the decision of the royal family to share those same risks, the same danger as ordinary people, it transformed the monarchy's relationship with the public.
This act of shared struggle, as the sources call it, it won them deep, enduring admiration. They weren't distant figureheads anymore.
They were fellow sufferers. And George VI actually institutionalized this appreciation for the civilian effort. He championed the creation of the George Cross and the George Medal, September 1940.
Tell us about the significance of those medals.
It was huge. The George Cross was ranked second only to the Victoria Cross, the highest military decoration for valor.
Wow. So a civilian award almost on par with the top military one?
Precisely. That was George saying. The civilian front, the home front, just as vital, just as heroic as in military.
And you see that in the people who received. The sources mention bomb disposal experts.
People like Stuart Archer, John Bridge, men dismantling unexploded bombs daily, risking everything.
And that young girl, Charity Bick.
Yes, Charity Bick, just 14, lied about her age to join the air raid precaution, risked her life delivering messages on her bicycle during air raid, earned the George Medal. These acts of local civilian heroism reflected the ethos.
He really became this genuine figurehead of national resilience.
He absolutely did. After the war, he oversaw that huge transition from empire to commonwealth, managing the independence of India in 1947, among others. But the stress, the strain of it all, combined with lifelong chain smoking,
took its toll.
A heavy toll.
Yes.
He suffered from Berger's disease, a severe circulatory issue. Then, in 1951, had his left lung removed due to cancer. He died prematurely in 1952, aged only 56, leaving the crown to his young daughter, Elizabeth.
Okay, so while George VI is quietly earning the nation's deep respect, Edward, now the Duke of Windsor, seems busy solidifying this reputation as the, well, possible traitor king. The sources focus heavily on that disastrous German tour in 1937, shortly after marrying Wallis.
We do need to put that trip into context first, though. According to the sources, Edward's motivation was multifaceted. He wanted to perhaps rejuvenate his public image after the abdication.
Okay.
And he also genuinely seemed to view the Nazis as a strong bulwark against communism and radical real fear across Europe then.
A common view, even among some in the establishment.
It was shared by many at the time, yes. Even figures like former Prime Minister David Lloyd George also visited Germany. People didn't fully grasp the horrors.
So was it just political naivete then?
Yeah.
Or something darker?
It was certainly startlingly poor judgment, compounded by that lack of intellectual depth we talked about. The 12-day tour, they went as private visitors, but their host was Dr. Robert Ley, head of the German Labor Front, a core Nazi org.
So not exactly a low-key visit.
Not at all. They visited factories, Hitler youth rallies, big companies like Krupp. The whole itinerary was designed to showcase German efficiency under. They were even deceived about the true purpose of a newly built concentration.
Good grief. And the people he met.
Terrifying. They dined with the Nazi high command. Ribbentrop, Speer, Goebbels. He met Hermann Goering, Hitler's second-in-command at his state.
And the source mentions that detail about Goering's map.
Yes, Goering's study apparently had a map showing Austria already absorbed into a Nazi Greater Germany, and Edward reportedly raised no objection. He was either deliberately turning a blind eye or worse.
The visit culminated in that meeting with Hitler himself. Burkhoff, October 22nd.
The most damaging encounter. Accounts vary, yes. Some say it was just standard diplomatic fluff. Others claim Edward indicated active support for Germany's increasingly aggressive foreign policy.
And the meeting ended
with both Edward and Hitler exchanging the Nazi salute, captured on film.
But wait, hold on. The sources mentioned something even more chilling, Brad. The minutes of that meeting with Hitler were later destroyed.
Yes.
What does that tell us, that single act of destruction?
It tells us that whoever controlled those minutes, likely British intelligence or government officials, believed the contents were too politically explosive, possibly even treasonous, too dangerous to exist.
It just fuels the theories, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That the discussion involved Edward facilitating some future alliance with Nazi Germany.
Exactly. And on the final night, Edward met privately with Rudolf Hess for an hour, allegedly just to look at model ships, but... Well, historians universally agree. Regardless of the exact words spoken, the entire trip showed a startling lack of judgment for a former king.
And that shadow just got darker during World War II itself. After France fell in 1940, Edward and Wallace were fleeing, ended up briefly in Spain and Portugal.
And the sources confirm that in the summer of 1940, the Nazis, specifically the SS, actually cooked up this plan, Operation Will.
To do what?
To kidnap the Windsors. The idea was to hold them, and then, after Britain was defeated, which the Nazis expected, reinstall Edward as a puppet king.
A puppet king of England. The fact they even considered him viable.
It speaks volumes about his perceived sympathies, doesn't it? Even SS officials later apparently called the plan ludicrous, but they conceived it.
And their choice of hosts in Lisbon, also suspicious.
Deeply suspicious. They stayed with Ricardo Espírito Santo, a Portuguese banker. MI6 had an active file on him, extensive, questionable German business connect. This proximity set off alarm bells back in London.
And this is where the allegations shift from just poor judgment to potential actual treachery. Recent research suggests Edward, while in Portugal, might have actively promoted an idea through Santo.
Yes, the idea that the Nazis should bomb Britain into peace.
Bomb Britain into peace.
To force surrender, which would conveniently pave the way for his return as king.
That is staggering.
The source material labels this alleged act treason of the highest kind, suggesting he actively encouraged the very strategy, the Blitz, that would soon devastate London and kill thousands of his former subjects. This advice was reportedly passed back to Berlin.
Churchill must have been horrified.
Churchill was, understandably, deeply alarmed. Edward's proximity to Nazi agents, this potential collusion, he acted swiftly, decisive, appointed Edward governor of the Bahamas.
Sent him into exile, basically.
An obvious exile. Edward himself called it a third-rate colony. The goal was explicit: get him out of continental Europe, break his lines of communication with Germany.
But the suspicion didn't just stop there.
No. Even after he was removed, on August 15th, 1940, Edward sent a telegram back to Santo in Lisbon, asking to be updated when he needed to act.
Act, meaning?
It strongly suggested he still wanted to be kept in the loop about a potential German victory, about his possible return as that puppet ruler. And then, during a visit to the U.S. in 1941, the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover monitored them.
Why?
Based on intel about alleged ties between Wallace Simpson and Ockam von Ribbentrop, the Nazi foreign minister, and even rumors of some arrangement between Edward and Goering to overthrow Hitler, the dark shadow just followed them everywhere.
So Edward resigned as governor of the Bahamas in 1945 when the war ended. But even then, the scheming didn't quite stop.
Apparently not. He continued to correspond with people back in England, floating ideas about returning, perhaps even serving as a regent for the young Princess Elizabeth.
While George VI was still...
Well, perhaps anticipating George VI declining health. It was a scheme, thankfully, vetoed by the palace and the government. Unthinkable, really.
They eventually settled in Paris, didn't they? Became this sort of curious celebrity couple.
That's the phrase used, yes. Socializing with American politician, Hollywood star. Edward published his memoir, A King's Story, in 1951. Used it partly to settle old scores, express his opposition to the post-war liberal consensus.
His life ended quietly, though. Paris, 1972. Throat cancer.
Exacerbated by heavy smoking, yes.
And here's a final piece of irony. Despite everything, the abdication, the controversies, the Nazi links the sources note that when his body lay in state back at Windsor,
a surprisingly large percentage of the British public filed past to pay respects.
Was that forgiveness or just enduring fascination with the man?
It's hard to say for sure. It definitely speaks to that enduring charisma he possessed, didn't it? But it brings us right back to that core debate about Edward.
Yeah. Was he forced out purely because of old-fashioned views on divorce?
Or was Wallace Simpson just the mean? The constitutionally convenient excuse to remove a politically reckless figure establishment had deeply mistrust way back.
The evidence we've looked at today really seems to lean towards the latter, doesn't it? His desire for political independence, his disregard for the official duties, that quasi-egalitarian behavior. Yeah. It all worried the governing elites long before Simpson was really on the scene.
She provided the necessary pretext, the universally acceptable moral reason for an intervention that perhaps was already politically in their eyes.
And looking back, that intervention proved absolutely essential for the monarchy's survival.
It really did. Because regardless of the motives back in 1936, Edward's actions after the abdication, the explicit Nazi sympathies, that 1937 tour, the alleged WWII, including apparently advising the bombing of Britain.
It just tarnished him forever.
Forever tarnished himself as the possible traitor king. His behavior completely validated every single fear the government ever had about his...
And conversely, George VI's reluctant, dutiful reign essentially saved the institution. He never wanted the throne.
Never.
Yet he embodied precisely the kind of steady, humble, strictly constitutional leadership the country desperately needed during its absolute worst crisis. He was a hero whose victory was, in part, defined by his own brother's profound failure.
It's an extraordinary historical irony, isn't it? Edward VIII's abdication, seen at the time as this unprecedented crisis, threatening to break the monarchy, it ultimately led to the installation of a king, George VI, who, through his unwavering stability and becoming that genuine figurehead during the Blitz, arguably saved the monarchy, saved it from potential revolution or at least severe instability.
So here's something for you, the listener, to think about as we wrap up. Consider this. How might the institution of the British monarchy be viewed today? How might British identity itself have been shaped differently if the charismatic, politically independent, and frankly reckless Edward hadn't been removed just before that most severe test in modern British?
Leaving the House of Windsor painted forever by a found about the necessary